We now have the pleasure of being joined by Will Vandervort, senior writer for the Clemson Insider, someone who's in depth on all things Tigers. Will, how are you doing?
I'm good, guys. How y'all doing?
It's good. It's a very exciting week up here in Syracuse. Biggest game of the season so far for the Orange. But before we talk about what's coming up this Saturday, Will, let's go back to last year's matchup between the Orange and the Tigers. One of the most exciting games, I would say, of the entire college football season. We obviously up here in Syracuse remember it probably very differently than the Clemson fans do and the people who cover Dabo Sweeney's team every day do. So how do people down in South Carolina remember the 27-20 win by the Tigers over the Orange last October?
And they remember it like they were lucky to win it. To be honest with you, what was I think just like it seems to be Clemson's thing, right? Somebody fumbles and the other team picks it up and runs it for 100 yards for a touchdown. It seems like. We just saw that last week, and it cost Clemson a game. Saw that against Duke as well. So I think images of that are in Clemson fans' heads, and I'll be honest with you, Clemson doesn't play very well at Syracuse. I mean, so there's concern there. They look back at last year, how tough Syracuse played them there in the Valley. And then they think about, 2 years ago when Clemson needed a field goal there to win the game. And Syracuse, I think, missed one at the end that would have put it in overtime. So they're a little nervous. And when they think about Syracuse, they think that, that's a thorn in their side. And it doesn't make them feel very comfortable when they play the Orange in football.
Also, going back to last year, after that game, Clemson had a little bit of a shaky ending towards their season. How do you think the game, specifically the way that it just happened and played out, changed the Tigers' season the rest of the way?
Well, I think I look at one play that changed DJ Uyunglele at that point in the season, and that was the fumble. DJ's not a guy that recovers very well from bad things that happen to him. And I don't know why that is. I think things get in his head. And at that point, you saw that's when he was having a real good season up to that point. And then he had the fumble, and it just seemed like he couldn't get past it. Like he couldn't get over it and forget about it. And his production, went down starting with that game. After that game, during the game, his production went down. You remember Clemson had to bring Cade Klubnik in at the end to win the game for him. I can't think that was a sign of things to come for the Tigers as they closed the rest of that season. And it all started with the quarterback play because I think everywhere else they were, except at wide receiver, they had so many injuries again. It was just unbelievable, the number of injuries they've had the last couple of years at that position. But I think a lot of it started with that fumble, and DJ just could not get it out of his head. And his struggles began there. And when your quarterback struggles, the rest of the team is going to struggle. That's just a fact. That's how football works now. And Clemson couldn't get past it.
DJ now at Oregon State. But would you say, Syracuse, that was a game of two undefeated teams. Would you say Syracuse kind of proving that Clemson was vulnerable to a loss at home, even if it was against a Syracuse team that ended up finishing the year only 7-5? Have the effects of that game carried over into 2023 now, where you see how Clemson has played against power conference teams like they did against Tennessee in the Orange Bowl last year, and then against Duke and Florida State to start this year?
Yeah, I mean, no, because I think every game is different and every game doesn't carry over to another. Clemson, if you watch the Clemson Florida State game, Clemson's the better team. I really believe that. I think if Clemson Florida State play again and Clemson plays the way they did, Clemson beats them by probably a couple touchdowns. Clemson's driving to go up 31-17 there at the end of the third quarter. And there's no doubt in my mind if Clemson takes care of the ball and scores there, even kicks a field goal there, takes a 2-score lead, Florida State will not come back because the Clemson's defense is legit, and they were flying to the football, and they really shut down Jordan Travis and that offense, held them to 286 yards in regulation and 17 points. I mean, if anybody watched that football game, Florida State was lucky to get a win and come out of there with the win, and probably should have said Florida State shouldn't have won. So I don't think really any game transfers to the other. Clemson, the Duke game, Clemson, I give Duke credit for winning the game and finding ways to take advantage of the game because Clemson made stupid mistakes. You get to the 1-yard line twice, you should score both times, and Clemson didn't score either time. They fumbled it away, literally. So, that's just it's how things go in a game. I think Clemson's beating Clemson right now, and it really doesn't have anything to do. When they lost to South Carolina at the end of last year, that was Clemson beating Clemson. They had a 16-7 lead, just got a safety. all they got to do is just do a normal kickoff, but they decide to do some trick play with it and they fumble. Carolina gets the ball and goes in and scores after that. And all of a sudden, instead of 23-7, possibly it's 16-14, very similar to Florida State last week. So it's Clemson beating themselves. That's really the effect. And I don't think it's so much the opponent as much as they're in their own head. Dabo mentioned it. And here's a stat for you guys so you'll know going into this week. Clemson is 72-4 under Dabo Swinney when they win the turnover battle. All right. They're right now, they are 5-5 in the last 10 games, and they've only won the turnover battle twice in those 10 games. So you do the math there. Clemson generally doesn't win when they lose that turnover, as most teams don't. But right now, teams have caught up with Clemson, so they're not as dominant as they were back when Trevor Lawrence was there and those guys, and they could overcome those mistakes. Well, other teams have caught up with them a little bit. So you're playing a Florida State team who's there, going to take advantage of those mistakes. They did. Same thing with Duke. Duke took advantage of those opportunities and won the game and deservedly. I thought Duke deserved to beat Clemson. I say Duke was the better team that night, just like I say Clemson was the better team against Florida State. So Clemson's just got to get out of its own way. If they do that, they'll win. I don't think it really has anything to do with their opponents. It's more because look at the mistakes. I mean, they're Clemson's mistakes. It's not like, Florida State, I give credit for calling the blitz there the other day, but what's Phil Maffa doing? He just bails on his quarterback before he even sees the blitz coming. He's got to pick that up, and his quarterback's thinking he's picking that up, and that's a Clemson mistake. That's not really what Florida State did. That's what Phil Maffa didn't do, right? So, it's just those kind of things they got to get better at.
So the thing that kind of resonated with me there was you saying that Clemson keeps beating Clemson. Mm-hmm. Is that a product of coaching? Is that a product of talent? What are the reasons that they're, kind of shooting themselves in the foot over and over again?
I think it's a combination of both, to be honest with you. There's something, I think you blame some coaching to it, but again, I'm sure Phil Maffa has been coached on what to look for, and you see he didn't scan the field enough and didn't stay in the pocket and wait long enough to see if something was coming, a delayed blitz and all. You got to assume he's got to understand his own scouting report, right? Like he understands, people understand when Phil Maffa's in the game, he's not great at pass protection. That's his downside. And you got to think Florida State understands that too, right? And so Florida State calls the blitz, seeing number 7 in there, because what happened, they feel like might happen again, and it did. So that's something where he's got to get better. I think he's probably been coached on that, but at some point the players got to take responsibility for it. But then there's situations like during the game where, like Clemson had a 3rd and a 2nd and 11 play down at the Florida State 13-yard line, and they run some end-around reverse pass, and it was just horrible. And you're trying to run clock there, and you want force Florida State to use a timeout. And why are you throwing the ball in that situation? It just was a bad call on Garrett Riley's part. So that goes to coaching at the end of the game when they didn't spike the ball. Could have thrown a Hail Mary. That's on coaching. So there's just different things where, yes, there's players are making mistakes, but the coaches are too. So it's a combination of a lot of things right now. They're playing good football in between those moments, and they're really dominant in between those moments. Guys, they held Florida State to 22 rushing yards, okay? They held them 1 yard in the second half. That's what Florida State had rushing the football, and only 130 yards the entire second half. That's dominant football. Clemson ran for over 130 yards in the second half. They're winning the battle at the line of scrimmage. Generally, when you do that, guys, right, that's football. You win, right? 99% of the time you win. Well, we just saw the 1% when you don't. Why? Because they just did stupid things with either the turnovers and then bad coaching decisions and things like that, where they're just shooting themselves in the foot.
You mentioned those stats, and Dino Babers brought it up in his press conference this week. Clemson won the stats battle in both Duke and Florida State, yet still lost the games. Yep. Is there a specific position group, whether it be even the new offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, or a position group on the field that maybe is different than in years past, maybe not up to the level that it has been?
Well, I think, you start with wide receiver. I think that's where really the big difference is. They just haven't been as good at wide receiver. Now, I think that's changing right now. We're seeing a guy like Tyler Brown. Man, this kid's going to be really, really good. They got Antonio Williams. I hope he's going to be back this week. Troy Stellato is a guy nobody knows about, but he was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, but he's been injured the last 2 years. So everybody thought he just fell off the face of the earth, but he's actually sitting right there on the team. And he really kind of balled, I think, against Florida State the other day. And so he's going to be somebody that gives them. Bo Collins, I think now that those guys are starting to emerge, it's allowing Bo Collins to make some plays. Adam Randall has the potential to be as good as those guys of the past, but he had the injury, torn ACL last year. Still kind of think getting over that a little bit, getting out of his own way. So we'll see. He's still wearing the brace, so that's kind of, I think, in his head a little bit, and those things happen. So I think they're going to be better there by the end of the year. You saw it against Florida State. Their wide receivers made plays, and that's key. So that's kind of changing a little bit, going back maybe toward the other direction again. Running back, even though as good as Will Shipley is and as good as Phil Maffa is, they're not Travis Etienne. I mean, let's be honest. Travis Etienne is the ACC's all-time leading rusher. I mean, there's a reason for that. I think Cade Klubnik is going to be a really, really good quarterback, but he's not Trevor Lawrence, and so he's not Deshaun Watson. And that's not disrespectful to Cade. It's just those two guys were different. They're just different guys, right? I mean, you just don't get those guys every, to get them one guy every generation is rare. To get two back to back is just crazy. So, it is what it is. So that's kind of where things have slipped a little bit. Defensively, they're every bit as good as they've always been. I mean, they're dominant on the defensive line. Their linebackers are actually probably the best set of linebackers Dabo Swinney's had. They're very athletic and fast and run sideline to sideline. And the secondary might be the best secondary they've had, really, when you look at a guy like Nate Wiggins, who probably won't play this week. But man, he was dominant against Florida State. Those wide receivers couldn't do anything on him. And he probably got himself a first-round grade just this game alone. And then the other guys have, I think, done well, and they got tall, physical defensive backs that played really, really well against Florida State. So, there's some pieces there that are different, mainly on the offensive side. They're very young on the offensive side. I think they're going to get better as the season goes along. And they'll have 10 of those guys back next year. So they're really excited about what the future holds. But right now, it's just not what it was a couple of years ago when Trevor Lawrence and them were slinging the ball all over the place.
It's interesting. The question I keep coming back to when, preparing for this game is can just any team compete with Clemson now? And based on what you're saying, it sounds like this is a team that still has a lot of talent. It's just kind of a work in progress with new coaching and working through the kinks of a lot of different things going on with the offense. The defense seems to be pretty stable based on what you were referencing. Looking at Cade specifically, you mentioned the wide receiver room. Like, you think Clemson wide receivers, my mind goes to DeAndre Hopkins, Sammy Watkins, Mike Williams, T. Higgins, all guys that have had successful NFL careers. Does not having a player like that prevent Cade specifically from having more success against some of the better teams he's faced? You look at the 3 Power 5 teams he started against, lost all 3 of those games. Does that hurt him specifically in that aspect of the game?
I mean, I say yes, it does. I mean, he doesn't have that guy. I mean, you wonder what it would look like if he had a T. Higgins, right? Or Justin Ross, I mean, probably is a little bit better. And so, yeah, you can say that. But it's just, the thing that hurt Clemson more than most people, I think in a way, COVID helped a lot of people, because I think in the ACC specifically, it allowed people to catch up with Clemson, because Clemson, its program is built on high school recruiting, and COVID really hurt Clemson there. I mean, they couldn't go out, and Dabo they couldn't show kids what Clemson is because nobody could come to campus, right? And that was a big deal. So for that 2-year stretch there, when really kids couldn't visit Clemson and they couldn't do that, it set Clemson back, and it allowed the rest of the conference to catch up in a way, I think, whether it be through the transfer portal and things of that nature. And so I think that played a bigger role than people really understand. And now I think you're seeing Clemson kind of rebuilding itself, because the last couple of years now they've been able to get the recruits back to Death Valley and show them what Clemson's all about and what that culture is inside the locker room and everything. And until you see it, it's hard to explain it, right? Clemson's one of those places that they say, what makes Clemson so great? And I'm like, well, I really can't explain it to you. You just got to come and see it for yourself. And once people do, they understand it. So I think that really resonated during the COVID years, and it allowed Clemson to slip a little bit with getting some of the top tier talent and getting where they need to be. And now you're seeing last year was a really good recruiting class. They're going to have another good one this year. They're kind of building it back up. And you look at the freshmen that are helping on this team right now, Tyler Brown, I just mentioned, right? You got TJ Parker at defensive end. He's going to be a future first-round guy. You got Peter Woods, who's unbelievable. They got this guy named Khalil Barnes who plays the nickel safety position. This kid's going to be something else. He's the next Brian Dawkins, if you will. So they got some pieces in place there that they're showing that recruiting's building back up. But as you just said, right now they're not there. And so it does allow the competition to catch up to them, and they have, as you've seen Florida State now rise to the top of the conference, and North Carolina is up there, and Syracuse playing well right now, and so there's a lot. The ACC right now is good. It's probably helped the ACC, but it didn't help Clemson. So so Clemson slipped a little bit back. The rest of the conference has come up, and now we see where we're at as Clemson's got a do or die situation at Syracuse on Saturday.
Going back to the wide receivers that Ethan listed, you can't forget about Hunter Renfrow. He's an OG Clemson guy. Focusing on Cade Klubnik, a high-rated recruit coming out of high school, what have defenses kind of been game planning to do to stop him? What are his strengths and weaknesses so far this year?
Cade, first of all, Cade has progressed. If you look at the Duke game and you look at the Florida State game, you got to give Garrett Riley a tremendous amount of credit for what he's done with his progression in just 4 games. Cade Klubnik, you look at that Florida State game, you can make the argument. There is no argument. Cade Klubnik was the better quarterback in that game. And it's not even close. You go look at how he sat in the pocket, how he controlled the game, how he was accurate with his receivers. He was the better quarterback than Jordan Travis. And I know the reason people aren't talking about that is because Florida State found a way to win the game, and you give them credit for that. But Cade Klubnik looked really, really good throwing the football and making decisions. Right now, guys, I believe he's got 12 touchdowns to 2 interceptions on the season. So he's making good decisions when it comes to throwing the football for the most part. He's gotten lucky on a couple, like every quarterback does, where guys drop balls and stuff like that. But in the Florida State game, there was none of those. There was no bad decision where you said, oh, that should have been intercepted. No, it wasn't none of that. The same way the week before against Florida Atlantic, he's kind of started where he's not just doing like he did against Charleston Southern, where he just throws a ball up and, oh my gosh, what are you doing, kid? And the ball flutters up in the air and the kid intercepts it, takes it for a touchdown. He's not making those kind of decisions. So if you go watch that Duke game and then watch his progression to the last 4, he's really got good. He's very accurate with the football. Something DJ was not very good at, and I think that helps Clemson a lot, helps the receivers a lot. He throws to the spot, which is really good. If I have to say his weaknesses right now are his decision-making in the RPO game. We saw that at the end against Florida State in overtime. They got 3rd and 1. You got to give the ball to Will Shipley there. I don't care what the numbers outside tell you. You got to understand the situation and say, that's a high percentage play. This is a low percentage play. I got to take the low percentage play, which is run the ball, get the first down. And you know what, guys, if you go back and look at it, that was probably the best push the Clemson offensive line had the whole game. Their hole just opened up for Will Shipley, and he would have probably ran for a touchdown. But Klubnik made the wrong decision there, and that's something he owned it, and he's got to get better at that. So those are the kind of things where his weaknesses are. And he likes to take chances, especially early in the year. He did that more than he's done the last couple of weeks, but it's still there. It's on film that he'll take chances every once in a while. So, but the good thing I like about him is when he makes a mistake, he immediately tries to correct it. He doesn't let it bother him. He doesn't live on it. Like that's where DJ, as I told you guys the last few years, DJ would just live on that mistake. He couldn't get past it. He'd be so in his head. Well, Klubnik just like, okay, well, I screwed up there. I'll go back out here and I'll do this again. And he forgets it really fast, which is a sign of a good quarterback in the future, because you got to learn to forget about those mistakes.
You mentioned giving off to Shipley, and while Klubnik is your highly rated, I would say probably Shipley and Maffa are the face of this offense from an outsider's perspective. They're who you think about, especially a Syracuse fan. The game Will Shipley had against the Orange last year, 27 carries for 170 plus yards and a couple of touchdowns, including the game winner in the 4th quarter. What makes the two of them such a yin yang strong pairing, and how hard are they to prepare for because of their different running styles and play styles?
Yes. The thing is, they're not really different if you think about it. Shipley's a little bit faster than Maffa, but he's not like lightning. You know, he's not like CJ Spiller or Travis Etienne kind of guy where he's going to break off a 70-yard touchdown on you. He can take a 50-yarder, as you guys know. He did that last year. But, you know, so there's really the only difference between the two is I think Shipley's he breaks more tackles, in my opinion. I mean, that's really the difference. He's got a different motor to him and mind to him. I mean, Shipley's crazy, man. I'm going to be honest with you. You look at his eyes. Watch him after a big play. Well, look at his eyes. I mean, the dude is like, that's the guy you want playing football for you. I mean, he's just emotionally, he's into it every play, you know, and he's just like, he's bringing it. He doesn't care if you're, you know, a 300-pound defensive tackle. He's going to lay the wood on you, you know, and try to see if he could run over you. That's just a different kind of beast where Maffa is a guy who can be physical and is physical. But he's not to the standpoint of that craziness that Will Shipley has. And I think that's what, to me, is different about the two running backs. And then I think Will Shipley's better in the passing game. Obviously, I think he's better at pass protection. I think he's better at running routes and catching passes in the screen game, in the passing game. That's why you see Clemson will move him outside and will line him up in the slot. They'll move him around in different positions. Well, you don't see him really do that when Maffa's back there. So I think the overall better player is Will Shipley, but Phil Maffa is a pretty doggone good running back too. And if you don't pay attention to him, you know, he's going to run it up on you. Ask Florida State. You know, he was the more productive runner against Florida State and has been really this season for Clemson, but that's because of the way people are playing Shipley. I think they're really kind of loading the box up, daring Clemson to throw the ball. And I think the more success Klubnik has, I think it's going to open up things for Will Shipley in the running game.
Shifting over to the matchup between the Syracuse offense and the Clemson defense, the Clemson defensive line is always stacked with a bunch of guys that are really good at pass rushing, playing the run, all that. And you mentioned that it's one of the best linebacking cores that Dabo Swinney's had at his time at Clemson. Syracuse's biggest threat is the running game, whether it be LaQuinn Allen or Garrett Schrader on the ground. How do you see the Clemson defense kind of strategizing on how to stop the Syracuse running game?
It all starts with the quarterback, right? Garrett Schrader. That's where it starts. I mean, Dabo said it yesterday. He's like, everything runs through him. The entire running game, the RPOs, everything is running through him, and deservedly so. I mean, the guy's averaging 90 yards a game running the football. As Dabo says, he could throw it 75 yards down the field. You know, and then I reminded Clemson fans of this on my podcast last night. Dude, he's like Big Ben, man. You know, you hit him, and I remember several times Jeremiah Trotter and Barrett Carter hit him last year, and they just bounced off of him like it was nothing. He just shredded them, like threw them down like rag dolls. And these are guys are going to be first-round draft linebacker draft picks, right? I mean, he's a very dangerous quarterback in the sense of what he can do, moving in the pocket. And when he's not always running to run, like he's moving around trying to keep plays alive, and that's when he's at his most dangerous, I think, is when he's improvising. And that to me is always a sign of a great quarterback who can keep his eyes downfield, even with all this going on in front of him, and make plays down the field. And that makes him extremely dangerous. He's a guy you don't want to defend. Levon was telling me last night, you know, Levon played in the NFL for 11 years and with the Steelers and you know, played at Clemson. And Levon says the guy you don't ever want to play is a dual threat quarterback. He says people like try to like categorize that as like it's not a good thing. And he's like, no, dude, a dual threat quarterback's the worst thing in the world because you think you got him and then you're running around everywhere and that guy just does something and you're like, how'd he do that? He says, you're worn out, you're exhausted. They just wear you down. So you know, that's what Clemson's got to face this week is a quarterback who's going to wear them down on defense. And so I think Syracuse is going to make some plays. You're going to see some big plays, I think, happen because he brings so much attention that it's going to cause a DB to move up, trying to go make a tackle thinking he's going to run the ball, and they're going to let a guy go past him, and they're going to throw like a 70-yard touchdown. Guarantee at least one of those is going to happen this week because Clemson's so aggressive, and they want to go get the quarterback so bad. Sometimes, as great as that is, it can also burn you when you're playing a guy like Schrader.
Talked a lot about the running game there, but in the pass game, Garrett Schrader will be down. His top target from last year in last year's game, Aronde Gadsden, out for the season for Syracuse. preseason second team All-American. He had 6 catches for 86 yards down in Death Valley last year. The new number 1 target, it seems, for the Orange is Damian Alford, who stands 6'6". Does Clemson have any defensive back? I know you were talking about the strength of their secondary earlier, but how do you see the Clemson secondary faring against a relatively inexperienced and unproven group of Syracuse wide receivers who haven't really done it on a stage like against a talented team like Clemson before?
I think at first, as I mentioned, it comes down to how they contain Schrader, right? I mean, keep him in the pocket, make him have to throw from the pocket, because then I think they can exploit that young receiving core, because we saw what Clemson did to Florida State last week. Florida State's receivers, Johnny Wilson, 6'7". He didn't really do much against Clemson. He had 5 catches, and he had 13 targets, I believe, something like that. 13 targets, 5 catches. Not great. Not bad, but not great either. You saw Coleman. He had 11 targets and only had 5 catches and 11 targets. Now, I mentioned Nate Wiggins right earlier. Nate Wiggins, Florida State was 0 for 5 against Nate Wiggins last week. So he's probably not going to play. He's got a bruised knee, doubtful for this game. So that's going to be a big blow for Clemson. But the rest of the guys there, Jalen Phillips, 6'4" safety. They got Jaden Lucas, another 6'2" guy. Nate Wiggins, if he plays, he's 6'2". So they got RJ Mickens is 6 foot safety. So they got size in the secondary, and they got guys that are athletic and that can jump out of a building. So that's not a concern as far as the guy's height. The concern is more if you lose containment because of what the quarterback's doing, and that's where the danger comes. So the key for Clemson is, like you said, make him try to have to use his receivers instead of running around and making something happen, and a guy just is able to get open because a DB breaks to go get the quarterback instead of staying with his man. I think that's more the concern for Clemson than actually who the receivers are at this point, because as you mentioned, the main guy they had to worry about is not there, and that's going to benefit Clemson, no doubt, as it benefits any team that's going to play Syracuse right now as long as he's out.
Looking at the matchup, this always interests me. Dino and Dabo always seem to have a love for each other, talking in the press conferences about each other. Why do you think there's so much of an admiration between the two coaches? Obviously, Clemson has won a bunch of the matchups in recent history. Syracuse hasn't won since 2017, but the games always seem to be close. Do you think it's like that is the reason why they have an admiration for each other?
Well, let's be honest, guys. Why are they close? I mean, it's because of Dino. I mean, they shouldn't be close. I mean, I'm just going to be honest, but his coaches do a great job game planning against Clemson, and football, it's all about matchups. In Syracuse, what they do is a matchup issue for Clemson. It always is. And, so they match up well with Clemson and what Clemson likes to do. Now, it's going to be a little different this year because Clemson has changed things on offense. They're more of a, spread you out air raid kind of offense, where in years past they were more pro style. So this is a little different. So it'll be interesting to see how Dino tries to attack this Clemson offense. But I think Dabo's respect for Dino is the fact that, Dino just he does what he does with less. And you can only imagine how good you guys would be if you could recruit to the level that Clemson recruits to. And I think Dino
been saying that for a long time. Will.
yeah. I mean, he's a good coach. He's one of the best coaches I've seen, and he does a great job with what he has up there. And Dabo, I think he respects Dabo because Dabo's built a program at Clemson where, yes, Clemson's always won and been successful in football, but to the level Dabo has it now is totally different than it's ever been in the history. And so he took Clemson to another level that nobody probably ever thought Clemson could get to. And I think that's where Dino's respect for Dabo is. And then they're just nice dudes, man. Let's just be honest, And when you respect somebody else and you're a good dude, it works both ways, And I think that's kind of what it is. So they respect each other as coaches and they respect each other as people. And I think that's where it comes from. But yeah, man, hey, look, Dino's one of my favorite coaches to talk to every year at ACC Media Days. He's always honest up front. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. And Dabo's kind of the same way. And I think that's where the respect level is.
Excited to see the pregame interaction between those two on the field on Saturday. Last I checked, the line is still Clemson favored by 6.5 points per where I'm finding it. I believe that's the lowest spread the two teams have been separated by since Syracuse joined the ACC. If I remember correctly, last year, even though it was two undefeated teams, Clemson was still nearly a 2-touchdown favorite in that game. How do you see? Do you like this line, Will? Do you think it's a fair line that Clemson should be favored by nearly a touchdown on the road? How do you see things playing out on Saturday?
I think it's a fair line. Let's look at the history, right? Okay, so 2017, Syracuse beats Clemson, right? 2019, Clemson won, but I don't think Clemson covered in that game with Trevor Lawrence. In 21, they played in Death Valley, right? In 21.
So no,
21 was the
21 was
game.
Right. So 17 Syracuse won. 2018 Syracuse nearly won again.
Right, in the Valley.
In Death Valley, yes.
Right.
And then 19 Clemson blew Syracuse out in the Dome.
But they didn't cover though. And so you're looking at spreads, you look at trends. Well, the trend is Clemson doesn't cover at Syracuse. So I think that kind of plays a little bit into it as well. And then the fact Clemson's 2-2. Clemson's last road appearance wasn't very good. They got beat by 21 points at Duke. So you take that into account. So there's a lot of unknowns I think Vegas has with Clemson. They just can't figure this Clemson team out a little bit. So I think it's more to do the lines that way because of Clemson. They just don't know who they are. And I don't think Clemson knows who they are, to be honest with you. So I think that's why it's 6.5. My prediction, is right around that number. I don't know if you guys will ask me, so I won't give it just yet. But it's right around that.
No, go ahead. You can give your prediction.
Okay, my prediction is 23-17. So I'm saying if you're right now, the line's 6.5, take Syracuse right now. So I think that's going to be that kind of game. I think Clemson's defense is good enough to keep Schrader in check, but I just don't know what to expect from Clemson's offense, to be honest with you. So you just kind of got to go with what it is. And they could win the game for Clemson and really just show out, or they could look like they did against Duke and just really lay an egg. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So I think that's the matchup in this game is Syracuse defense against Clemson's offense. It really is, in my opinion.
Will, can't thank you enough for your time. Where can people find your work ahead of Saturday's game and throughout the season?
Yeah, they can read me at the clemsoninsider.com. We cover all things Clemson and recruiting as well. And so you can go there, read all the stories as we got stuff up already for this game. Been doing it since Monday. We'll continue all the way up through kickoff on Saturday. We'll have a ton of coverage after the game as well. You can find me on X, I guess is what it's called now, at Steeler Will. Yes, there's a reason why I'm called that. And then you can get us at Clemson Insider as well. You go to Facebook, our Facebook page at Clemson Insider. So all kinds of ways. You can see my podcast, The Believing Clemson Football with Levon Kirkland and me. That's out right now. We do that live every Tuesday at 6:15. So, but you can go back and watch it, or you can listen to it on wherever you get your podcasts as well. So lots of different ways. We talk about the Syracuse game and what's coming up, and Levon gives a little bit of breakdown. So if you want to hear a breakdown from a former All-Pro linebacker, I would go check it out.
Will, can't thank you enough again for your insight and your expertise about all things Clemson. Enjoy the game on Saturday. Will you be coming up to Syracuse for the game?
Actually, this is the first time I'm not coming. I got some other stuff I got to do. I will be covering the game, but doing it from my couch this time. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make the trip this time, but I'll be back probably in a couple years. But right now, no, I'm not going to be able to make it this year. The only road trip I'm not going to make this year is this game. So,
well, we're looking forward to your coverage anyway, and thank you so much for taking some time.
All right, guys. Appreciate you.